What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Pro v Pro, coming off a big hit. It's Olympics week. A lot of exciting stuff here, Justin.
Yeah, my lineup kind of busted early last week, and I kind of knew where I stood. I say early with the NAP WD, but I also was very aware of your Jonathan Vegas love. So sent you a text Saturday night saying, "Hey, I know who you're a big fan of," and yeah, what a great way to have a weekend, right? So you got your brother cheering you along, I'm sure, and yeah, it was fun to watch. So yeah, let's just dive right into it, man. Congrats, obviously, on the big hit, and let's just talk a little bit about how it happened.
It's funny because on last week's show, we actually brought up the fact that my brother's this huge Johnny Vegas fan. So for those who didn't get that reference, that's why. And it's been for years and years that way. I still can't really explain why, although his story, like Vegas's story, is a pretty fantastic one. But yeah, I feel like on the last few holes there, I kind of knew I had it wrapped up, and my brother's over there like sweating his ass off, rooting for that Johnny Vegas win. So very funny the way that ended up. But yeah, it was a really fun week. It's kind of hilarious that you did text me Tuesday or Saturday night, like I'm kind of feeling like you might have some sweats going on, and it's been a pretty fantastic season. And the one thing I will say is I feel fortunate that when we've had those like really great calls on somebody, whether it's Vegas, I'd even throw McNeely in there. We'll talk about McNeely a little bit more with the GPP scores coming up. But when we've had those, it seems like those are the weeks where I've had the 6 for 6s, and I haven't had too many where it's like, you know what, this lineup would have won absolutely everything, but this guy missed the cut, which, by the way, was like my entire season last year. So total reversal in fortune in that way. And thankfully, because it was another fantastic week, and now we've got some big time sweats coming up here for the FedEx Cup playoffs. 2 $4,444 tickets, one this week there, and then also have a $4,444 ticket for week 1 of the NFL season from Saturday Showdown at the Open Championship. So a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, it's kind of like we reversed roles for the years, which is like it's fine, right? So like this year's been for me like the near misses, and yours have got home, and I just think it shows as a group like how close our roster construction is, and kind of you still have to make choices, right? You still have to decide on a few guys, and using all the GPP scores, the stuff that we have available to us now. It doesn't mean you're always going to get it right, but I think it's shown our ability to, like, when we win, it seems to be like it's not we're not doubling our money or anything like that. It's been some pretty big hits.
The other thing I'll bring up with the GPP scores, let's actually bring up my lineup from this past week, and I'll even zoom in on this so you guys can see it a little bit better. One of the really cool patterns this year is that we've had several weeks. Obviously, it doesn't happen every single week, but we've had several weeks where there's been a very clear like first 3 into the lineup. Thigala, Mitchell, and McNeely were that this week. I think they were the only 3 guys over $8,000 with positive GPP scores. So for those who aren't super familiar with the GPP scores, any positive number means the player is under-owned relative to his likelihood of success, his likelihood of failure, and his ownership projection. So the fact that we only had 3 guys under-owned, that made it really easy to figure out how to start lineups. The last time I can remember the first 3 in being that clean and obvious from the GPP scores was way back at Craig Ranch. I believe it was Minwoo Lee, Benny on, and might have been Thigala again or something along. It might have been Mitchell again, but whatever the case is,
maybe even Pendrith. It might even been Pendrith who won at Craig Ranch.
It wasn't Pendrith because I didn't have him.
It just seems like to me the GPP scores are great, but they're even better in these events when you don't have Scheffler, Schauffele, Spieth, Thomas, Morikawa. Like when you throw out some of the names that sometimes gain ownership because of their names. For instance, this week it was Finau, right? The reason he didn't have a positive GPP scores, he was like 50% owned in single entry stuff. Like, so I think that the huge advantage it's an advantage every week. It's a really big advantage in fields like this.
So I agree completely, and I think there's a very clear and obvious reason for that, and that is when we have a week like this one, also at Craig Ranch, when there's no one, number one, that's priced so prohibitively, where like Scotty has been priced, where he's up near 13,000, even reaching and eclipsing 13,000 a lot of weeks. You don't get these additional like lineup structure type effects when it comes to ownership. So, for example, this week at the Olympics, we have Scotty Scheffler with the highest GPP score. But the problem is, if you use Scotty, and we'll talk about the Olympics as well at the end of the show quite a bit. But if you use Scotty, there's not a whole lot of enticing plays. There aren't many guys that you're going to be excited about playing in order to fit Scotty. So it's like, is he under-owned because people don't think that he's worth that price? Or is he under-owned because people think, man, Scotty's fantastic, I just don't like the guys that I have to use to fit him, which is a very different thing. Whereas like this past week, Thigala wasn't 7.6% owned because people thought he was too price prohibitive. It was because he just slipped through the cracks and people went to Tony Finau and others near the top instead. And so, you know, one of my hot takes last week in the hot takes article was that Thigala would slip through the cracks. Now, when I said he might slip through the cracks, I was thinking he might get between 10 and 15%. The fact that we got him at 7.6 was a godsend. That was just incredible. So a lot of things really broke our way, and that's why it turned out to be such a great week.
And like just this is even kind of from an outsider perspective here, right? So the first thing I look here is your highest owned player finished the worst or next to the worst. But even at 14%, I want you to look at his points.
Mm-hmm.
So he literally finished 40 spots worse than Thigala and was only outscored by 13.5 points. Like I think people underestimate how important that is.
I had a really good feeling about this week on Friday because I noticed how much my guys were scoring. So Silverman, like check him out here. Silverman finished worse than Mitchell. He was 3 strokes worse in power, and he beat them both in DraftKings points. Like the scoring was insane from a guy, 17 birdies, 2 eagles, and a streak from Silverman. I think on Friday, I had a streak from absolutely everybody on the course in the morning round. I think I had 3 morning, 3 late, and everybody had a streak. All of a sudden, it was comfortable. The only real question remaining was, were my afternoon guys going to all make the cut? Seamus Power was the one I was most worried about, and he started just blitzing the field. He had a streak with an eagle on his first 4 or 5 holes, something like that. I was like, all right, well, he's good. And Mitchell ended up being the only one we were sweating. He got to 6 under with a tap-in eagle on number 6, by the way. And it was like, this should be so simple. We should be skating to a takedown all weekend. And then all of a sudden, Mitchell just lost it. Double bogey, 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 and needed to really battle his way back to make the cut. But yeah, you make a really good point. And then the other thing I'd say there is notice, this is a very contrarian lineup. And in fact, to your point, the most popular guy, who was also the second most expensive, was actually the worst play. And so it gets to something that I've talked a lot about with PGA, which is, I think in PGA specifically, and we'll talk a little bit about how PGA relates to NFL as well, because let's face it, we're all really jumping the gun to get started with the NFL season. But
2 nights from now.
Yeah, with PGA, you can afford to be contrarian across the board, because remember, every single spot in your lineup, it's not just about who you play, it's also who you're fading. And if you're using a chalky player, you're losing out on an opportunity to potentially leverage the field if that guy really struggles all week or misses the cut, which missed cuts, by the way, another key difference between NFL and PGA, but we'll get to all that. I think the main point I wanted to make is it's a very contrarian lineup across the board. And that doesn't just mean that I have the guys that can get there and can help me take down the tournament, but that can come from any spot in the lineup, right? So if you have a lineup that's, let's say, 4 chalky guys and 2 contrarian guys, I think a lot of people would look at that and say, yeah, I have enough differentiation It's like, okay, but now you need one of two guys. It has to be one of those two guys who has a really great week. Otherwise, you don't have a chance at a takedown because you're not unique enough compared to the rest of your competitors. Whereas in this lineup, any one of the six could have been the guy that has, that ability to help me separate from the field if he has that really contrarian win or even just like a top 5 finish. McNeely, Vegas, both were able to do.
Yeah, and you kind of hit on where I was headed with this conversation of like heading into NFL and being contrarian. And we've talked a lot about and golf is a little bit different than football, and I know this golf show, but just as it from the FTN side of stuff of how we can help as a whole. The thing that is most intriguing to me is the times to eat chalk and the times to really be contrarian and the way you build lineups around it. And we talk about this a lot with golf, right? Hey, we think this one stat is going to pop a lot, whether it be, hey, our model doesn't show this, but we think approach is going to be more important than a normal week or whatever. Let's just take a few minutes and apply that to football. Just so, like you said, I don't think we have very many listeners that are like, oh man, football, I'm out.
I was having this conversation the other day with somebody. It's hilarious. It's like the number of people who play NFL DFS that also play PGA DFS, that proportion might be small, but the proportion of people who play PGA DFS that also play NFL DFS, I'm thinking it's really, really high.
Yeah, so let's just get in a little bit of like these GPP scores going into this year of how you can help and how FTN can help build lineups. And I also want to hear your opinion on, hey, let's eat chalk at this position or with this player and why. If that does happen, why does it happen? And I'll just kind of let you roll with it from there.
It's an awesome question. So I think the very first thing I'll say is that the concept about the GPP scores, the concept that drives the GPP scores, carries over into any sport. Basically, all you're doing is you're looking at how likely is this guy to have not just like pay off his price tag, but actually deliver the type of performance that's going to help me win tournaments. And then it compares that to how likely he is to fail. So in PGA, we have this just fantastic definition of what it means to fail in a lineup. The guy misses the cut, right? He sinks your chances because he misses the cut. It's so clean and obvious. It's such an easy way to define failure. Whereas in NFL, that becomes a little bit trickier, right? Does a $5,500 running back who's 30%, if he gives you 10 points, is that a failure? Is 8 points a failure? Is it, the snowflake shows up on DraftKings, or is it that he scores 10, but there are two other $6,000 running backs who score 30 plus, right? So the way you define failure is a little bit tougher in NFL, but the concept is the same. It's how likely is this guy to succeed in a big way? How likely is he to fail in a big way? And given that, how deserving is he of the ownership projection? And at their core, a positive GPP score means that the player is underowned and you should use him. And a negative GPP score means he's overowned and you should at least consider fading him. And again, that will carry over to NFL. And so you brought it up with like different positions. So I think the GPP scores will just kind of take care of that in and of themselves. We're going to have simulation results based on a fantastic model that Caleb and I are developing. So it's going to be really, really cool stuff. Like one of the things that we're incorporating is not just, like, hey, this guy we think is going to get 60% of the carries and 10% of the targets. Let's sim from there. It's also, but wait, what if we're wrong about his 60% share and it's actually just 40% and his backup is going to get a bigger workload this week? Or what if they're going to really lean into him as the bell cow and he gets 80%? So we're really ramping up the variance and getting much better, like real life type results in the simulations. And so it may be the case that we see, running backs, when they're 40% owned, they're always going to have negative GPP scores and we should always fade them. But those really expensive receivers, like I have a feeling Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson, potentially Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, obviously, like those guys might have the type of GPP scores that we often see from Scotty Scheffler, Xander Schauffele, guys like that, because their likelihood of success is just so much higher than their likelihood of failure. So very curious to see what that's like. But at the end of the day, building NFL lineups is going to be really similar. really similar to building PGA lineups, because the GPP scores just kind of tell us this guy's great, this guy's great. Don't consider these four. This guy's great, and you just move from there.
Yeah, so I just want to go to an example, right, of something that everybody knows about, right? Somebody that, if you've been a follower of NFL and DFS, kind of a short story here is the way that I got hooked into DraftKings to begin with is I put $100 in and got whatever their match was, right, $100, and I decided to do the $3.20 max. And it was the Sunday that Aaron Jones scored like 5 touchdowns against the Cowboys. And everybody knows I live in Dallas. I'm a Cowboys hater, right? I can't stand them. So I was like, I'm just going to throw this guy in here. I didn't know anything about it. I finished third and made $20,000. My $100 turned $20,000. I was like, this is way before I hit the 50,000 in golf or any of that. I was like, I'm forever a winner, right? I'm never going to spend this much money. Probably have spent that much money now. Luckily, I've had some other hits to go with it. But, yeah, so I'm going to go to a running back to me, right? So we're getting to a world where there's very few bell cow running backs in the NFL. But in the day, Dalvin Cook from Minnesota was a clear-cut bell cow, got every touch, let's call it 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We're 30 minutes from lock. Dalvin Cook's out, Madison's in. We know now how much they rely on a bell cow. And let's say I just think Madison's better than maybe the public, right? Maybe than anybody else. I just think Madison's that good. And he's probably going to be 35 to 40% owned at like 3,500, right? Like a 3,200. He's only got like 5 touches for the year. Do you lean into a guy and be like, man, this guy's got huge upside. He's going to get all the touches. Let's just write him into the lineup, and then I'll use my GPP scores around that? Or do you just say, hey, like his GPP score is right around 0. I'm just going to fade him and be done?
Yeah, so I love this question because I think there are 2 ways to answer it. The first is, number one, I want to know what Madison's GPP score is in this example. Now, the thing I'll say there is, remember, there are a couple things that we really care about here. So at his price, like I think the argument in a lot of ways is, man, at 4,000, 3,200, like whatever the price would be, at this minuscule price, what are the actual chances that he fails? And often it's really, really low. But then there's also the question of, how likely is he to be somebody that like I need to have in my lineup to actually have a chance at winning? And in that regard, it can often be pretty low. And so, or at least relatively speaking, it can be a lot lower than his ownership, right? So like if he has a 20% chance of being optimal, for example, but he's going to be in 80% of lineups, well, now maybe I do want to differentiate. But I think the best answer is it depends on the other GPP scores. Are there guys that are shining in the GPP scores the way Keith Mitchell, Thigala, McNeely, Johnny Vegas were this past week? Or is it kind of difficult to find the guys who are severely underowned because everybody playing this really cheap running back, in this example, it's Madison, is then also being able to use those savings to go play CeeDee Lamb and to go play Tyreek Hill? And so it's like everyone's almost being forced into the same lineups, that everyone who fits in that build is getting inflated ownership. And so if you're going into that build, you really can't find the guys with the high GPP scores. So I think, yet again, the GPP scores, like one of the things that just makes them so fantastic is they can kind of answer these questions for you. They can tell the story for you of how you want to build your lineup. Because as we saw here, like this past week, Thigala, Mitchell, McNeely was this very clear and obvious start. And if you put those 3 in, okay, now you're in the 7,000s, and you can actually see, let me bring this lineup back up here. The third place finisher, another FTN subscriber, also had Vegas. So there was a 2v2 off of my winning lineup. It was Harry Hall and Troy Merritt against my Seamus Power, and Ben Silverman. And honestly, I looked at this pairing as well. And the reason I went with my guys is just I felt like the weakest link in my lineup was stronger than the weakest link in his, because I think Merritt is pretty clearly the worst player of the four. And Harry Hall wasn't a big enough upgrade over either Power or Silverman to make it worth taking on that weakest link. And part of that too is because I knew I had this really solid high upside core of Thigala, Mitchell, and McNeely at the top that I didn't need to go searching for like another guy who could potentially win at low ownership. I just wanted two guys who would play pretty well, and that's exactly what Power and Silverman did.
Yeah, so like take it back to football, the same idea, right? So let's say you've got Justin Jefferson at a huge negative PPP score or GPP score because of, you know, a guy like Madison or whoever that's going to, but then you go down and you get like a AJ Brown, a Garrett Wilson, and a CD Lamb with these huge positives, right? So if you eat that chalk with Madison, because it allows you to fit those other three in with such huge GPP positive scores, is that a good time to just eat the chalk with that one running back? Say he's negative. Let's say his GPP score is like -5.
Yeah, so I think, well, first of all, that's a really good point. I think how large that negative number is does matter, where it's like if he's -3, for example, in GPP scores, okay. Basically what that means is, you know what, he's probably a little bit over-owned, but if you play him with a really solid lineup around that, that's totally fine, right? Whereas if he's -50, -100, something like that, it's saying this guy is nowhere near deserving of this much ownership. Steer clear and actually use it as a potential opportunity to really leverage the field. If he goes out there and gives you 8 DraftKings points and gives 60% of the field 8 DraftKings points, you're in business. And I think another way to make that point is, let's simplify this even further and let's make it like a 2v2. So let's say Madison's $4,000 and Tyreek Hill is $9,000. And Tyreek Hill has a really bad GPP score. But there's a $6,000 running back. Let's say it's Jahmyr Gibbs with a fantastic GPP score and a $7,000 receiver. Let's say AJ Brown, as you mentioned, with a fantastic GPP score. Now it becomes, it's not do I play or fade Madison? It's what 2v2 is better. The really high upside combination of Jahmyr Gibbs and AJ Brown that is severely underowned because everyone's being pulled to this super like stud and dud approach, or the stud and dud approach in Tyreek Hill and Alexander Madison in this example. So I think that's the best way that I would put it, is like, what combinations can you switch to? It's not just about that play itself. It's what other decisions does that play impact? And again, that's where the GPP scores really come in, because in that example I just gave, like, they'd be pointing you pretty heavily to, man, you've got a $6,000 and a $7,000 running back and receiver pairing that arguably has even more upside and it's going to be significantly lower owned.
Yeah, I think that's the key of learning about using the GPP stuff and using it efficiently. I think, like I said, I just think the upside of using it is so great that I almost feel like you're just giving, we're giving away all our secrets, right? Like the fact that, like, with all the different sports and with golf is so different because the volatility is so high. So you could do everything right and never win. Football is a little bit smaller player pool, of who can do what.
To give one final 2v2 kind of thought experiment here to this, let's say that this combination of like Madison and Tyreek Hill was going to be extremely popular, and we gave Tyreek Hill, maybe we give him a ceiling around 30 points and a projection around 20, but Justin Jefferson is $200 cheaper, and Justin Jefferson also projects extremely well for us. And we give Justin Jefferson this fantastic GPP score. Okay, now the 2v2 gets a little bit more interesting, because now in order to shift to something more contrarian that still has a decent chance of beating the chalky 2v2, all you have to do is shift from Tyreek Hill to this one other guy. Now you're still using Madison. So again, there are still ways to play chalk, and particularly the GPP scores will tell us the good chalk that we should play. usually it's going to be the more expensive guys. Like, in fact, these past 2 seasons, I've written a weekly article called the Chalk Report, where we have really examined, what positions and things of that nature are performing the best as chalk in NFL DFS, and the quote unquote mega chalk wide receivers, the Amon-Ra St. Browns, Tyreek Hills, when they get to 30% or higher, man, they have these massive success rates. So I think the GPP scores will kind of reinforce that idea, but it's as you said, it feels a little bit like a cheat code at times, because it just points us to such clean builds and just such like obvious builds. Think about it. There are so many decisions we have to make in a week in, week out basis, whether that's PGA DFS or NFL DFS. We have to play 6 to 8 guys, but then we also have to fade a million different guys. It's so nice to have GPP scores just make a lot of those decisions for us, where we can then just focus on like those last few decisions. Like for me, Power and Silverman versus Harry Hall and Troy Merritt, or things of that nature, instead of having to make the whole entire lineup just by making one decision after another, after another, after another.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is, and I'll go back to like that first, where I finished third in the $3.20 max, $3.20 max. Like, that's unbelievable looking back at it. Even then, whatever that was 3 or 4 years ago, like the amount of information is nowhere near what it is right now. Like, it's not even close. So like that has to be taken into account when you choose what you're doing now. There's so much information, and I think there's so many people that actually make money playing DraftKings, and or B, think they should or will make money playing DraftKings, right? And then you have the casual player. So it's just a very different dynamic, and all the information is kind of given to you. You still have to make your own choices and figure out where you stand with everything going forward. It's just an advantage. So if you have an advantage, use it, right? That's just it's literally, it's like Robert McIntyre taking a drop off a sprinkler head, right? You have an advantage, use it. Don't say, oh no, this isn't right. I mean, just take advantage of the information given, and I'm pretty excited about NFL this year. I need my Browns quarterback to turn it around a little bit and be a little bit better to make it even more fun. But I think that it'll be a fun DraftKings season, and I think we need to, maybe on this show, we'll continue to talk a little football mixed in with the golf.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say about football before we jump into the Olympics this week is I also think it's going to help immensely with stacking, right? These GPP scores are going to be fantastic there, because you could have instances where, like, maybe Josh Allen, is going to be the most popular quarterback, and you're saying, man, do I really want to use a 20% owned quarterback when I know that quarterback chalk isn't always like the best thing to lean into? But maybe he has like a not so great GPP score, but then one of his receiving options has a fantastic GPP score. Maybe it's Curtis Samuel has the best GPP score on the slate. It's like, okay, well, now I have like a really obvious way to stack Josh Allen that not many others are doing. Allen, Kincaid, Curtis Samuel, or something like that. And now okay, that's great. Or maybe it's, a similar thing with, maybe it's Jalen Hurts has a great GPP score. A.J. Brown has a bad one, but Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert have good GPP scores. Okay, now I've got this really contrarian Eagles double stack, because I'm not using the number one receiver that everybody else is going to pair with Jalen Hurts. So it's just, I can't wait to use them for NFL. I think they're going to be every bit as profitable, and hopefully they are, because it's been one heck of a PGA season. So with that, let's see if we can have the same type of success this week at the Olympics. I'll start by saying the course fit model, we had to make it up this week. Just purely, we had to make it up. So Josh and I spent a lot of time kind of talking about what we saw the last time at Le Golf Nacional, which was the Ryder Cup. At least for those of us who don't watch the DP World Tour each year, like myself, that's my last memory of the golf course. And for a lot of the players this week, at least the better players this week, that is the last time they saw the course. And so what we came up with is a 25% decrease on distance, a 33% increase on accuracy, a little bit of an increase on approach play, pretty sizable increase on around the green play, once again, 33%, and then a decrease of 20% on putting predictive value. So we tried to keep it fairly tame, where the course fit projections are not going to deviate a ton from just our baseline talent projections, but have it significant enough that there are going to be some guys who really stand out. So for example, like Colin Morikawa has a 1.42 expected strokes gained baseline projection, but he goes all the way up to 1.95 with this course fit model. There are some other guys who really seem to fit our expectations for the course. So I guess we'll start with this question for you. Does anybody else like really stand out in your mind as somebody who just immediately comes to mind as benefiting from the decrease on distance, the increase on accuracy and around the green play, and the decrease on putting?
So, I mean, obviously, like you, the first thing that comes to mind is the Ryder Cup, right? And thinking who should have won or could have won. There's a couple of guys that I'm going to lean into right off the bat, or that I kind of started, actually 3 guys that I kind of started my lineup with. And I'm not going to say that it necessarily fits that model exactly. It's more of who wants to be there, how they can play that golf course, what we know about that golf course. Rory was one. I'm going to take the best overall driver in the field, I think. And I think that after the letdown a couple of weeks ago, that he wants to go, and he has some country pride, right? He cares about being there. Tom Kim was another one that came right to mind as soon as it started. I think that he'll play really well this week. I think it's a good golf course for him. And then the other one is Corey Connors.
I have no qualms with any of those picks whatsoever. I think Connors especially stands out to me as a pretty good fit for our expectations. I'll give you a contrarian name because he kind of reminds me of Vegas from this past week. It's Benny On. So let's remember that our strokes gained driving accuracy metric is very different from just percentage of fairways hit. And one of the main ways that it's different is it doesn't penalize guys for being long when measuring their accuracy. And so Vegas certainly doesn't hit a super high percentage of fairways ordinarily. He did this past week in large part because one of the things that the course fit model was telling us last week was that accuracy off the tee was really predictive from the strokes gained driving accuracy standpoint. And Benny On is a similar type of driver in that way. Now, Vegas was actually one of the most accurate in the field last week. Benny On's accuracy off the tee has faltered a little bit, so he's no longer one of the most accurate in this field, but he still fits the mold of somebody who's far more accurate off the tee than most people realize because of how damn long he is. So when accuracy is as important as we think it will be this week, a lot of people tend to cross him off because they just say, he's a bomber. He's going to miss fairways. He's going to miss them big. It's not really who he is. He can hit a lot of fairways because as long as he is, he can be super accurate, like Rory, like Bryson, like Johnny Vegas, like Keith Mitchell, a lot of the guys that we were on last week. But he also stands out to me in the sense that he's has a much better short game than he is a putter, and he's also a pretty good iron player. So one of the early guys that has a pretty good GPP score around the 8,000s and even below. So I think I'm going to be on Benny this week, and hopefully he can do exactly what Johnny Vegas did.
Yeah. The one, so I was kind of scrolling through prices, right? Just kind of seeing Wyndham. I mean, no matter what you want to say about Wyndham Clark and whatever he is, but 100 to 1 plus on Wyndham Clark is an outrageous price, in my opinion.
Is that what he is this week? Man, let me pull up some pricing because I actually haven't been able to look a ton at pricing yet because we're still trying to get the Olympics into the prop shop. I was emailing with our source earlier today, so hopefully
even my shitty book has it at 75 to 1. So I mean, you know, there's just certain guys that like that price is that's just an outrageous price in my opinion. Like for a guy that can win in that situation, that's going to take it serious in my opinion. You know, that's the other thing is like who's going to go over there and really try hard. And I saw another interesting one, right? So do you want
real quick, the best available, actually not the best available. What I'm seeing on Bet365, where I like to make most of my bets, he's only 66 within each way. But that number 2, like, it's pretty solid because to your point, when Wyndham Clark is on, if he does show up and have his A game, I think like a really good kind of thought experiment when betting PGA is, if this guy is in the lead late on Friday, what chance do I think he has of still being in the lead on Sunday? And if Wyndham is in the lead on Friday, I feel very confident that he'll still be there Sunday.
Yeah, no doubt. So I have an interesting one here. I have Scheffler, Schauffele, McIlroy, Rahm, and Morikawa against the field.
Well, let's see. We've got Scotty at 28, Schauffele at 15, Rory 7, Rahm and Morikawa, was it?
Yeah.
Rahm 4.4 and Morikawa 8.5. So that is 13, 20, 35, 63. That's 63% for those guys, just adding it up.
And they're minus 135. The field is plus 112 on mine.
Yeah.
It's pretty spot on in my opinion. I think if you throw Scheffler out of that changes everything. And if you believe
what were the odds?
The 5 players were minus 135 and the field was plus 112.
Okay. Yeah.
I think
the other, pretty well priced.
If you think that this field is going to benefit European golf like it did in the Ryder Cup, you obviously bet the rest, right? You're basically betting against Rahm and McIlroy.
Well, just because you think it favors Europeans, like, if you want to say the Open Championship favored Europeans, well, who won the Open Championship? So I'm not tossing Xander out of there. I wouldn't toss Morikawa out of there either, because I think this, if this golf course plays the way it did at the Ryder Cup, Morikawa would be much better suited for this than almost any other American was back at that time. So, yeah, I would say I would bet the minus 135 side if I had to make a decision, but it's probably a no bet for me. As a pretty solid price.
I just thought it was interesting that they offered that.
Yeah.
Do you think anybody will take this more serious than others? Like, is there a certain pride factor for a culture? The first thing that came to mind for me was like a Matsuyama, right? The culture of the Japanese culture seems to take an event like this with a little bit more pride than maybe some of the others. Does that I mean, you can look at it 2 ways. Does it make him more nervous, or does it make him, play better?
So yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think a lot of the Americans and Europeans who have played in Ryder Cups, as much as they like the Olympics aren't going to be to them what the Ryder Cup is, because they would have all grown up dreaming about playing in the Ryder Cup and bringing that title home for their country in that regard. But I don't really care about answering that question when it comes to either handicapping the tournament or picking my DFS plays, because the thing that I say all the time in this is that how much a player cares doesn't affect how likely he is to succeed a lot of the time on the golf course. Anybody who has ever played golf knows that. You can go to the course determined, I'm going to try so hard today, I'm going to stay focused. You still bomb your first tee shot way right or something like that, right? Golf is just fickle in that way. It doesn't care how much you care. You can play really well or really poorly regardless. And the other thing I'd say is almost everybody playing cares every single time they tee it up. They still play really poorly sometimes. They still play great sometimes. I just don't ever really incorporate motivation into my process.
So with the huge value of short game, do you take a guy like Victor Hovland and just throw him out immediately?
No, in large part because we're just speculating about the course fit model. Like, if we knew with certainty that around the green play was going to be the most predictive thing this week, then probably. But he still projects fairly well, and we know that he always has like the possibility of just being so good with his ball striking that even if around the green is important for most, it can be less important for him because he's just going to have fewer times where he has to use it. But also there's a path to around the green just not being as predictive this week as we think, in which case, again, Hovland would project better than he already does. And he already does project as well as Lowry, Fleetwood, better than Neiman, better than Noren, a lot of guys around him.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I was getting at, is he can boat race the field with his ball striking that it doesn't even matter what else you think about his game, right?
I think the most interesting thing about this week is I kind of said it already in regards to last week. We had 3 guys over $8,000. There may have been a 4th or 5th, by the way. I just know that the top 3 of Thigala, Mitchell, and McNeely was really obvious to me last week. But this week, everybody over $8,800, actually including Matsuyama at $8,800, has a positive GPP score. Everyone near the top is quote-unquote under-owned because, as I alluded to earlier, the bottom of this field is bad. Everybody under $6,800 has a negative GPP score or 0, basically negative. And the guy who's positive there is Mito Pereira at 0.1, and it's extremely difficult to project him because he has been downright atrocious on Live. So I was talking about this with Josh earlier. I'm actually very curious your thoughts on Mito this week. My take was that, number one, I did bring him way down in the projections based on from where his just baseline was, because we only include rounds with shot link in a lot of our data. So the fact that he's been playing on Live just wasn't in our first round of data. So I brought him way down. But the thing I said to Josh was, I don't want to bring him down too far because I don't want to penalize him too much for playing poorly in event after event after event that he doesn't care at all about. So I don't know what your thoughts are there, but to me, like, I think that if you were going to penalize him terribly here, you'd have to never play a Live guy ever who's good on Live because they play so poorly on Live relative to how they play everywhere else. Look at Bryson in the majors this year. Like he's been better in major championships than he's been on Live. If you would have told me a couple years ago we were having this conversation about Mito, I told you you're nuts. Like, and there was a point where I thought he was highly talented, like was going to be around forever. Yeah, I don't know if this is just a money and run type of deal for him. It's really fascinating because somebody with that much talent, let's say that he doesn't care, right? But he's super talented and he only plays the Pro-Am in the tournament. He's got enough talent to still play well from just those events, unless he's going out and getting shit-faced every night. And, I don't really have a good answer. Like, he's one of the ones that I'm just like, I don't understand, right? He doesn't make sense to me. Where were they playing, in Tulsa or something a couple years ago in the PGA where he should have won or had a chance to win? And he's a fascinating one to talk about with the Live discussion, especially right after the discussion we just had on motivation, because one of the things I said was like, I don't usually care about motivation because everybody always shows up to the golf course every week on tour wanting to do well. So just because, they suddenly need to play well to qualify for the FedEx Cup playoffs or something along those lines, it's not going to change anything. They wanted to play well before when they weren't playing as well. Well, Mito's an exception to that because Mito hasn't had a reason to care about any result of his in over a year. So I do think he's going to care about the Olympics, which I think like an important thing there is he probably put more work in leading up to this event than he has in quite some time. There are official World Golf Rankings points. So even if you think like he doesn't care about, playing for his country or winning a medal for his country, which I think probably everybody does. But even if you took that out, there are potential exemptions into majors and things of that nature. So I think he's going to care, which the important part to me is that it means he's probably going to prep for this event better than he has any of the other events over the last year when he's played horribly, which makes him a very unique example relative to everybody else who cares and preps every single week. So that I wanted to make clear why I do care about the motivation for him when I don't care about motivation 99.9% of the time.
So in the middle of that, you brought up a good point about caring about playing for your country and stuff. Do you follow Michael Kim on Twitter?
Mm-hmm.
Great follow, great dude. And they showed a picture of the American team, and he responded. He literally just quote tweeted it and said, "But how much are they getting paid this week?" Like, I kind of took exception to that. Well, like, they already are. They have more money than they can spend in their entire life, and they got a chance to be one of 4 players to represent their country. I just thought that was I think that's all that's wrong with this world right now, right? With all the different stuff that we're going through and all the differences in who you're voting for and all whatever matters in life. Like, these 4 guys don't care that they're not getting paid. And if they do, that's their own problem. They already
could be wrong about this. I think that tweet was a dig on Patrick Cantlay for saying that he wanted Americans to be paid for their participation in the Ryder Cup. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's what he was going for.
I hope you're right. I hope that it wasn't clear to me, and I didn't think about that being part of but I mean, that makes more sense of somebody like him making that comment than when I read it and the way that it came across. I was like, what are we worried about here, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a weird. I think there's a pride factor. I think there's a lot of people that would give up a PGA Tour career to just represent their country.
In the comments of that tweet, by the way, there are a lot of people saying that guys do get paid for meddling. So yet another reason for guys to care. They can potentially get paid. I don't know that for sure. I think they're probably right about that, at least for the Americans. But yeah, I really want to hear your thoughts on the bottom of this board. You're kind of the breakout talent whisperer, if you will, where, hey, if we have to go dumpster diving this week, do you have a strong feel? I'm guessing a lot of these guys you aren't even familiar with, because it's not about your connections and your knowledge about the mini tours and the Corn Ferry Tour and things of that nature. It's just a lot of guys are just from other countries playing different tours that you maybe haven't heard of either. So what's your read on this board? Is there an easy way? Are there guys to go to, I think is the better way to put it, that make you feel good about playing the really high GPP scores of Scotty Scheffler or Xander Schauffele?
There's one guy at 6,500 that I gravitated to immediately. Form, there's a lot of short game form. There was a lot of reasons. If you pull it up, I'm going to see it. You think you could guess it?
I'm going to guess CT Pan.
No, it's Sharma.
Okay.
I think that he CT Pan, that's a really good guess, because I was a big CT Pan fan a couple weeks ago at the British. So and he played terrible. He was the only one. Remember when I sent you a message the night before and said I'm going to play this one late early lineup that had Schauffele in it, that Pan was the only one that missed the cut. So he's kind of off my list right now. But Sharma, I think, is going to fit right here. He's rounded into form a little bit better. He had some struggles. Another guy that I think will care to be there. Outside of that, I'd be going up to a couple of live guys. I'm not sure under 7,000 that I really like much else.
To me, this week is all about what you do with the live guys. I think getting those guys correct probably is the key, because, for example, if you told me somebody under $7,500 wins this week, I'm not sure that I would take anybody before I took Mito Pereira. But if you also told me that somebody between 6,500 and 7,500 gets dead last this week, I also might go with Mito Pereira. That's the most likely. So I really don't know what to do with him. That makes me want to play him, because I do think he's going to stay fairly contrarian, because everybody is that unsure about him. And typically when people feel that uncertain about something, they just avoid it. And I like to lean into the fact that, hey, uncertainty goes both ways. He could be dead last. He also could be first, and that's the exact kind of strategy that I want to take in my lineups. So that's the kind of player that I should be using in my lineup. So I think Mito is probably the first guy in for me when we're talking about way down in this price range, which, of course, if you're using a $6,800 guy, it does make it then easier to either use Scotty or Xander. But I'm also going to entertain the idea of like more balanced lineups that go, it could be like maybe you start with Morikawa or something, and then you only have to dip into the 6,000s once. Maybe you even go more balanced than that, and you really focus on these $8,000 guys with positive GPP scores. Norin, Connors, Matsuyama, even Day and Straka, Benny on, and then maybe you only have to go once or even 0 times into the 6,000s. So we have a lot of options this week, and I really don't know yet what I'm going to do.
I think Puig is a interesting option there at 6,900 too.
Mm-hmm.
Like he piques my interest of a guy that like could come out of nowhere and win. Yeah. Goes just above that into the 7s. I think Olsen's another one that like has that upside. That's kind of he was young, came out on fire, kind of went away, and has kind of worked his way back. And I don't think he's valued back to the player he is now. Outside of that, like I'm not really like I don't see much else down there that even intrigues me.
I think you're right about Puig. We have him projecting really poorly and for really low ownership. I think we probably have him projecting too poorly. He has flashed. He gained about 2.9 true strokes per round at Live Houston when he finished tied for 3rd. Gained 1.7 at Live United Kingdom in his last start. Boy, he was terrible at the Open Championship. Did make the cut at the U.S. Open, but it doesn't look like he's getting really any attention. And he's got the like spike good performance, terrible performance, spike good performance, terrible performance that we do like to see when we're value hunting for low-owned guys, because there aren't like it was the same sort of thing last week. There's no such thing as a safe play. So go for the guy that if he does well, he's actually going to help you win tournaments and not just min cash. And I think Puig does fit that. Mito Pereira certainly fits it. There are some guys down here that like Nick Taylor's an interesting one. He's getting ownership, but it's not like he has a terrible GPP score. He doesn't project that well for us. But in terms of guys that you just know, hey, if he's got a chance at the gold medal, he's got the stones to actually go win the thing. Nick Taylor does. He does have that. So we know that about him at least. I think the guys to really avoid are these like right around $7,000 guys. There's a pocket of players. Bezaden who actually projects as the best value for us, but just too popular. Looks like he's going to have a negative GPP score. Victor Perez, Eric Van Rooyen, and Steven Yeager, really, really bad GPP scores, because basically what we're saying there is everybody's going to identify them as the best values, but they're still not great. So you're better off fading.
Yeah, I mean, like Valimaki can play a little bit too. Like he's shown up on some leaderboards lately. Matty Schmid showed up on some leaderboards. We know he can kill it. Hits it really far. If he just happens to drive it straight, it could be a week that he plays really well. I just don't, I don't see anybody else that gives the upside as maybe some of these other guys. I just think it's a stretch, right? If you wherever you go down there, you're just kind of stretching. I do like the Nick Taylor deal because, like you said, he's not going to be scared of the moment.
The last thing that I'll say here is I definitely think this is a week where a lot of these decisions, we should wait until the final ownership update to really make that decision. In fact, last week when I was building a lot of my lineups, I was starting Thigala, Mitchell, and then going to Harry Hall, Vegas. I think what the first lineup that I had built went Thigala, Mitchell, Harry Hall, Vegas. I think it was Power, and then the last guy was 7,900. That's what I had left. And there were like 3 guys that I was considering there. All 3 of them missed the cut. So one of the difference makers for me was that the last update of ownership brought McNeely a little bit lower in the ownership projection, enough to make his GPP score stand out. All of a sudden, I knew, okay, that $7,900 last spot, I need to find a way to get that up to McNeely, make that the the starting trio. Hopefully this week we have something similar where right now the GPP scores aren't really presenting a clear path. Hopefully by the end of tomorrow, Wednesday, we will have a clear path. So just I think a good final note there that when we're building lineups, we have until Thursday to set them. Let's always be patient, and that's kind of a lesson to take each week.
Yeah, that's probably something that I don't do very well in golf, that I do better in like NASCAR and some of the other sports I play, is take, at the last second, reel into ownership and stuff. So yeah, I the longer this goes on and the more we learn, right, the more see the clear path to winning is maybe being a little bit more patient. And then everybody talks about don't change your lineups, right? Don't change right before lock. But there's a lot of benefit to it, right? So you kind of forget about the one time you messed up and think about the 5 times you made the right decision.
Yeah, and actually I would add to that and say, to me, it's not about don't change your lineup before lock or do change your lineup before lock, but it's don't build your lineup until it's actually time to really make those final decisions, because in that way, you're not becoming emotionally attached to lineups that you have already built. And then the decision becomes, oh, well, if I make this change and the other lineup does really well, like I'm going to hate myself for making that change. Just don't put yourself in that situation. Just make it as easy as possible on yourself to make the best decision when the time comes to make it.
I don't know. I've left enough money in empty lineups for forgetting or having kids something come up, and so I always build a dummy lineup no matter what.
I do too. And actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because you know what? I've already built a dummy lineup for week 1 of the NFL season. So who am I to say? But I'm not emotionally attached to it, so it's okay. With that, I think we'll end this week's episode. The one thing I will say, though, is we talked a lot about NFL on this show, so make sure you check out Stats Hub over at FTN Fantasy. Even if you're not a subscriber, you do get limited access. You'll be able to see a lot of the base stats. You won't be able to use the advanced filters, but man, just endless possibilities for what we can do this season with our data, with DVOA, which we have, nobody else does. We chart all our own data, and then, man, this thing is phenomenal. Like if you want to see how a quarterback, how his receiver has done against the blitz on 3rd downs, in the 2-minute drill, in the wind, in the snow, whatever you want. If you want to see how they've done against cover 2 or cover 3 or the combination of that, or how he did in weeks 1, 2, and 7 and 8 when he had his star left tackle in, and the other weeks he was out, anything that you want, we have the ability to filter all of that data and show you exactly what you're looking for. So make sure you check that out. And then, as we talked a lot about, I just can't wait for this season to see what the GPP scores can do in NFL. So if you're not yet a subscriber, I highly recommend becoming one. It's going to be one hell of a fun ride this year.
Yeah, I mean, just the best bang for your buck there is, right? If you're willing to wager whatever amount it is every week, why not make sure you have the best data available?
Hopefully you pay for the subscription and a hell of a lot more right away in week 1, or do it earlier. Do it in PGA this week or next week, whatever. So lots of really fun stuff on the horizon, and it's been quite the season so far. Hopefully we can keep it going. With that, thank you everybody for tuning in. We will catch you next time.